Welcome to the Hispanic Serving Institution STEM Hub Summer Webinar Series. We would like to take a few minutes to welcome you and to introduce ourselves. I am Martha Desmond.
I am Delia Valles. We are both STEM faculty at New Mexico State University and on the STEM Hub leadership team. We hope you find this webinar series helpful in your pursuit of NSF funding.
Thank you.
I am Delia Valles from New Mexico State University, and I am with the NSF HSI STEM Hub. I co-host this webinar series along with Dr. Martha Desmond. I would like to welcome you to our fourth webinar of our summer webinar series targeting grantsmanship and preparing for the NSF HSI call due in September. Today's topic is developing research questions. We have over 300 participants from across the country registered in today's webinar. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This webinar will last 1 hour. Today's webinar will have 2 speakers, and we anticipate from 15 to 20 minutes for questions at the end of both presentations. All questions related to today's topic must be submitted via writing in the question and answer box. However, if you have questions related to Zoom or technical questions, please use the chatting box. So we have 2 different things to capture questions. We have an individual dedicated to monitor the technical questions, and we also have an individual in Twitter managing the comments about the webinar. There's also one team, and this team consisting of Dr. Martha Desmond, Dr. Margie Vela, our program manager, and myself, curing questions and reading them at the end of both presentations. We might not have enough time to answer all of the questions. However, we will answer the questions at the end, in our portal. Something that we like you to do is to please join the portal by registering using the link that actually was shown at the beginning of this webinar. Webinar series are also being recorded, and all of the recordings will be posted on the portal. So that's why we highly recommend you to register in the portal, become a member of the network, and then the membership is free. At the end of both presentations, you should also receive an email with a short survey monkey from Dr. Christine Velez. Please, we will really appreciate if you could immediately fill it out. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce you to our speakers this afternoon. Our first speaker will be Dr. Sudarshan Kudwarkar. He is a tenured associate professor in the civil engineering and in the civil and environmental engineering department at California State University, Fullerton. He's a licensed professional engineer and a board certified environmental engineer. He's a recipient of numerous teaching and research awards from national agencies and also organizations. His ongoing research involves monitoring the occurrence of pharmaceutical and personal care products in large wastewater treatment plants. He's also investigating the photodegradation kinetics of pharmaceuticals used in human therapy and the occurrence and persistence of neonicotinoid insecticides. Our second speaker is Dr. Alex Raselis. He's an associate professor in the School of Earth, Environmental, and Marine Sciences at the University of Texas in Rio Grande Valley. He directs the NSF IUS program. Specifically, his program is transforming undergraduate education in STEM through culturally relevant pedagogy or pedagogy community engagement, where his team offers professional development to faculty across the College of Sciences, offering tools, ideas, and shared experiences so that they might transform their own teaching, research, and service in ways that improve their student success. We will start with Dr. K, which he been asking us that the students normally call him Dr. K. And then after 20 minutes, Dr. Alex Raselis will start his presentation. Each one of the speakers, I will show the 5-minute card and the 1 minute card before the end of the presentation. Both Dr. Kay and Dr. Racel is welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Dr. Kay, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Medina. Let me share with you my screen. Can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, we see that.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to share with you some of the insights in developing research questions. Okay, so here is a brief outline, general outline of my presentation. I'll be talking about the very nature of research question, what it means, what its importance, and then I will initiate into how we are going to develop the research question, where exactly we should look into, where those ideas are, and then we will look into how other people are doing it, what criteria they use for developing the research question. And once you have this fairly good idea that you want to pursue, then we'll see how we can scope out those questions. Like scoping out means how broad they are, how narrow they are. Typically, the research is basically focused on one primary idea, and then there are a series of small sub questions that arise out of it. Correlation means relationship between hypothesis and question. Maybe I'll spend a minute or two on that one. And then final reflection on research question. And the whole idea is when you develop this research question, you have to be very well aware of the merit review criteria, okay, that you have to fulfill. All right, so having said that, so what is research question? So research question is very central to your proposal, okay, very central, it's the heart of your proposal. In fact, the entire narrative of your proposal permeates from that one primary research question, okay? So if you have a good research question, then you can weave your ideas around that research question. Your research question has to be very focused, targeted, unbiased, in the sense you're not out there to prove something to the world. Otherwise, the moment if your if your question happens to be biased, then your personal preconceived notion starts reflecting in the narrative, and which is not universally accepted. So that's there. One of the most important thing before before going deeper into developing this research question, is to understand our own level of ignorance and the current knowledge that is out there. What is mean by that is, for example, if you are currently using the iPhone 5S or iPhone 5, you may feel that, wow, this is the marvelous technology, but the technology has gone way ahead of it. Okay, we are now probably iPhone 17 or 18, somewhere around there, So the moral of the story is make sure where our level of ignorance is, how far the science has come in, because even though momentarily you feel like your research question is really genuine and state of the art, it may be outdated. So to know the answers to all the questions, generate as many questions as you can. So that's the very nature of research question. So how do we scope out? Where we should start then? Obvious question is where we should start. The very basic things, the very primary things to start out is to see where the gaps are. So how do you understand the data gaps? By knowing what is already known and what is need to be known. And that's where you will say, okay, so this is where the stuff is already there and this has not been done so far. Data gap will give you a head start to develop your research question around. Again, don't think that just data gaps are the only best way of developing the research question, because sometimes the data that is out there maybe based on incomplete science. Maybe they have inconsistent findings. Maybe there are failed experiments. Maybe there are inherent contradictions built in those reported data gaps or those reported findings. So sometimes what is already reported in the literature may not necessarily be the benchmark. You have to think through it. If the results are reproducible, if they are based on sound fundamental science, or if there are built-in inherent contradictions, and then you have to also understand how big the data gap is, how significant that particular data gap you're trying to address and formulate your research question. So those are some of the ingredients of generating the data gaps. So how do we see where we are and how we can develop the research question then? First thing, extensive literature review. So now that will extend your knowledge in your own field and the ideas you want to pursue. Sometimes it so happens that the ideas you want to pursue have already been tried elsewhere. And trust me, nobody's going to fund those ideas that have already been tried and tested and have not yielded positive result or have already yielded a positive result. Okay, so that's there. Second thing, preliminary data. Sometimes when you write the proposal, you have some preliminary data that you have generated in your lab. You may have surveys, you may have interviews, you may have your own experimental data. You can use the preliminary data to develop the research questions. Now, this type of thing has an originality, has an element of novelty. Okay, that's you. Okay, you have already done the extensive review. You already have a preliminary data to support your hypothesis, so on and so forth. And so that's one of the best way to go about it. State of the art, where the literature is, where the studies are, what has been done. So that's how it is, and where the technology stands. So this is how you will scope out for your research questions. So it is, again, how good your proposal is depends on how good the research questions that are raised there. What is the soul, the primary question, how strong it is, how good that particular research question is. So it's the same analogy, better ingredient, better pizza. If you're having well-defined research question, it will help you direct your activity, direct your efforts toward generating a better data collection and developing the relevant activities towards that one. Again, the more specific your ideas, okay, the probability of developing a good research question increases tremendously. So better ingredient, better pizza, better question, faster research. It's easy to understand. If you're having a well-formulated research question, it is easier to understand. So what are the criteria? So how we come up with the research question that is really good. So this is one of the finer criteria that typically people use to polish their research questions. So feasible, that there are adequate number of subjects, adequate technical expertise. What do you mean by feasible in the sense, if you are proposing, let's say $2 million proposal, you're feasible means how many students you're going to impact over 5 years, okay? Adequate technical expertise, your team has to have built-in in-house technical expertise, affordable in time and money, manageable in scope. So if you are going to propose an idea about sending students to Moon or Mars, it might not be doable. Interesting. Obviously, the idea has to be interesting. It has to it has to make those reviewers think about those research questions. Oh, is that so? Is it really so? So that It has to be novel. Novel in the sense the originality should be there. Okay, either it has to prove the existing ideas or disprove the existing ideas. It has to be ethical, relevant to both the scientific knowledge, the community, and the scientists in your field. Okay, so these are the criterias that we have to follow through to reflect on those research questions that we have developed. Another way of developing a better research question is the Goldilocks principle. You know, the Goldilocks principle is basically that there is this the girl in that Three Bears stories wants to have her porridge neither too hot nor too cold, but just right temperature. Same way, you can use the Goldilocks principle to polish your questions. For example, here is this question. So, how to improve undergraduate education? Now, if you have this question right there, it's too broad. It doesn't tell you which type of undergraduate education. Is it liberal art? Is it economics, management? So it doesn't say. It doesn't say which university, where exactly, you know. So it's vague, it is abstract, and it's systemic problem. It is problem across the universities. Obviously, all universities need to improve undergraduate education. So it's too broad, not focused, not targeted. So you cannot pursue that type of question. Second question, how to promote STEM education at undergraduate level. Now you are having some focus, some specificity. You are looking at STEM, you are looking at undergraduate level. Okay, so this is something. Okay, it is there, it is showing some signs of it. You can then further formulate it, specific and targeted. What does that mean? How to promote sustainable STEM education at HSI. Okay, I mean, you can write undergraduate education at HSI. Now you have everything. You are very specific, very focused. You are looking at Hispanic Serving Institute. You are looking at undergraduate student. You are looking at only STEM education. Okay, so that's how you can narrow it down from very vague, very broad in scope to very manageable. Okay, so this is how your question should evolve. Is it doable? You know. Another way of looking at this is the primary question, the main theme. So this is the question you want to address: global warming. Now this is very broad topic, so you may want to branch it out. Okay, so to address global warming, what are those societal, economic, geopolitical, community engagement, and environmental factors? Okay, now it's too big in scope. It is not manageable. Even if you want to address in global warming by implications of societal, economic, geopolitical, and environmental factors to understand global warming. Great topic, but too many things, simply not doable. So first you branch it out and reflect on those ideas, those questions that you cannot answer all the questions in all these areas. Then you pick out one of the areas to fine tune your question. So from the broader to the narrower, outside in. So this is the same one. So this was a broad topic that we were looking into global warming. So implication of social, economic, geopolitical, and environmental factors to global warming. That's too broad. It's not going to happen. It's not doable within the proposed duration. So that's, you may want to get more specific. In this one, I pointed out the examples of community engagement and environmental stewardship. You may want to pursue just environmental implications. So environmental implications to global warming. So in that one, you can say, okay, carbon footprint, air pollution, global sea level rising, you know, and then you can, so your broad questions is implications of various environmental factors to global warming, primary question. Now sub questions will be, Greenhouse gas emissions and implications. So those are the small questions. Okay, minor questions that are derived from the main ideas. Okay, so you can see that in this one you have the main question about global warming, and I looked into the one subset of those ideas, implication of social, economic, geopolitical, and environmental factors. Then I boil it down to the focus question: global warming, importance of community engagement and environmental stewardship. Research questions: and how does community engagement and environmental stewardship help mitigate global warming, so on and so forth. So, but you have to have one primary question that is there. Okay, how county officials. So these are small subsections of it. So you must consider to have one primary research question, the focus group, either the minority student or STEM student or just physics student or just lower division science and math student. Target population, maybe freshman, sophomore, senior, junior. Interest to scientific community. You are bridging the gap somewhere. You may want to increase the STEM workforce, and there is an urgent need to increase the STEM workforce. So the scientific community is interested in having the local STEM workforce. General public is also interested to have their pupils, their kids going into the STEM education. The outcome, what is the net outcome? How many students you are going to impact? Time frame. How means you cannot have infinite time there, you know. So here are a few examples, just a general question, narrowing it down and tailoring it to a little bit broad question. Why did so many students fail during COVID-19? Now we do not know which student. High school, we do not know. Undergraduate, graduate, doctoral, STEM, science, we do not know. Too vague. Do not write that type of questions. How many students in CSU have failed due to COVID-19? Now, this is, you can say 230 students, end of the story. Avoid those type of questions where you can either answer by a numerical number or either answer by yes or no. On the other hand, things like impact of COVID-19 on student success in STEM at large HSI, Cal State Fullerton, a case study. By the way, there is a rapid grant proposal out there, you know, want to pursue these ideas. So some of these type of questions, narrowing it down, tailoring it. Here is another one. What it is like to work during quarantine? Abstract idea. Well, I was sad, depressed, constrained. How has quarantine disrupted academia? Another question. Now, if you are looking at impact on work productivity of physics teacher during quarantine at large public HSI university, now you are looking at something, some specific target group as opposed to, the reason why I'm saying this, the moment you formulate a wrong question, vague question, you will lost in the literature review itself. Your introduction section will be flying everywhere. It's just uncontrollable. So hypothesis and a question. Hypothesis is an educated guess. A prediction you derive out of your past experience or your knowledge in the area. And research question is essentially the hypothesis. Means put it in the format of a question. Again, the primary question should be driven by hypothesis rather than the data. So that's the moral of the story. This is the reflection before you start developing the questions. So who? Specific group, gender, male, female, age, ethnicity, black, white, American, Asian, Pacific, so on and so on. To what extent? What are the issues, topics, subtopics? Why this issue is important? Who is interested in solving this problem? You know, when is this a current problem? Yes, there is still a shortage of underrepresented minority students in STEM workforce. Where? At national level, can you narrow to a specific group, specific location? Yes. HSIs, public university, California, narrow it down. So then again, what makes a good research question? This is where you can reflect on whatever the questions you have come up with. Does it have many possible answers? Is it flexible, open-ended, testable, so on and so forth? So again, so this is a guideline that is created by Kristen Pauling, and so that's a self-test. Again, the take-home message: poorly drafted research question affect the supporting activities and subsequent results. Research project will likely fail if the objectives and hypotheses are poorly developed. And so keep it in mind, the merit review criteria, and that's their originality, rational, and accessibility to resources, and that's that. So that's all I have. These are the references, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kay, for your great presentation. We are going to take questions at the end of both presentations. Thank you. Now, before I introduce you to Dr. Raselis, I'd like you to please notice that we have a social media out there with Twitter and also a LinkedIn. So if you want to make any comments, please go ahead. Some people have been asking about where to find these presentations and the recordings. Again, Edmundo, our student technician, will be posting in the chatting room the link to the to the website or the portal where you can register to actually have access to the videos and also to the PowerPoint presentations. So we are going to be muted, and please, Dr. Raselis, go ahead and with your presentation.
Great. Can everybody hear and see me? Okay.
Yes. We hear you
Okay,
and
thanks.
see you.
Thank you, Delia.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again for your attendance. Good afternoon for most of you guys. My name is Dr. Raselis. I am at UT Rio Grande Valley. I was here with you guys last week, and I'd like to expand on some of that conversation that we've started. Dr. Kay gave you a very granular look about how to develop research questions, about some of the ideas that you might have at your own institutions. I'd like to take a little bit more of a course view about how to develop these research questions, and in particular about where you find yourselves and in the context of developing these research questions at a Hispanic serving institution. Let's see. So the goal here is to start the role on what is a discourse on what is the role of Hispanic serving institutions. And then to make an argument, from colleague to colleague about trying to craft research for informed action in order to transform STEM education at our institutions. I think the goal here is to be able to exchange and network new ideas among ourselves and find ways that we can collaborate and learn from each other. So I'm equally excited to learn from you guys. Now, I prepare to talk with two contexts in mind. And the first is, as you guys know, we're experiencing an unprecedented pandemic with COVID-19. And in this case, Hispanic serving institutions and our students are particularly vulnerable. We've been finding evidence that, the COVID has hit Hispanic communities and minority communities disproportionately. Your students, my students, are particularly vulnerable. And then as we wait for the national educational industry to react to the fallout of this pandemic, HSIs have to take a proactive role of thinking about how will they ensure the success and access for their students in particular. The other context I wanted just to acknowledge is the current state that we've seen in the last few days. Just this morning, I received a notice from our president acknowledging the pain and suffering that a lot of communities across the country and world are voicing and through peaceful demonstrations. I think it's an example of how our students and our communities are increasingly aware and very desperate to address some of the growing injustices and disparities and outcomes that are based on race. And in this context, I'm going to make a more general a plea about how to develop a research question and thinking about these contexts in mind in particular. Hugh Stafford published a paper. He's an ecologist. He published a paper in 2017 talking about the importance of boundary spanning. And boundary spanning, I'll explain what that is here, but basically he posits that there are two ways of kind of knowing. There's this axis of individual where we are either driven by worry or concern and curiosity, or like on the other extreme, curiosity and wonder. And then there's this axis of science, right? Where we are looking either in this process of discovery to solutions. And what we've seen a lot in this case, we are driven a lot is by, and you can see in this context, it is from worry and concern about how these communities, our communities, are being disproportionately affected by some of the challenges that we have. And so what we look for are some solutions. Unfortunately, a common practice in science is to start from a point of curiosity and wonder, and then lead to a process of discovery. So like, for example, I may argue with my colleagues in that good research for transforming science education at minority serving institutions shouldn't be driven by hypotheses, but should be driven by concern for our communities and an examination towards a solution. So some of the characteristics he talks about, I'll list here, you can read them later. But in order to facilitate this discussion, I want to first talk about the context of what an HSI is. And I mentioned this to you guys last week. Ultimately, it was a discussion amongst many communities across the country who are asking and trying to capture on how we could take advantage of some of the opportunities that historically Black colleges had been taking of in response to the 1965 Education Act. And so at that time, around the early 90s, some of the communities in Texas, New Mexico, Illinois had formed an organization known as HAKU, in which they determined that about 25%, if you had a student population of about 25%, you can identify a Hispanic serving institution. Now, that was actually commemorated in Congress in 1992. And of course, from there are these programs that have designated funding to be able to address some of the questions relevant to these communities. However, still today, Hispanic serving institutions receive only about 2/3 of the federal funding that our colleagues at non-minority serving institutions receive. Now, we are very unique in that a number of our students that are enrolled in our institutions are first generation, many of them are, and many of them come from low income homes. And so when that population of student has become the new normal, in fact, 42% of students at institutions across the country can identify with these designations. So as of 2020, we have 539 HSIs across the country. Most of them are what Maritza de la Trinidad would call de facto HSIs. That means they became HSIs because they've reached that demographic threshold. Unfortunately, HSIs, as a result of our demography, we have some relatively low graduation rates, relatively low retention rates, and of which contribute to this deficit-based narrative, right? Where students that we serve are considered as and portrayed as high risk, high maintenance, or underprepared. Now, what this signals to us is a need to switch to an assets-based model for student success, which is geared towards our students and which focus on equity, which focus on diversity, and cultural and linguistic wealth, right? Not a deficit, but a wealth. That these are true assets. So borrowing from some education literature, for example, we can use that to inspire what we want as an outcome or the solutions of some of the concerns that you might have as instructors or administrators at HSIs across the country. So one of the big things you read about in some of the call for proposals is that there is a need to increase representation among Hispanics and other minorities in these STEM fields. I think this includes in academia, in administration, at universities across the country. The prevailing model has been to find out ways to increase academic achievement, retention, and time to graduation for these students, right? Okay, what can we do? Here are some high risk, high maintenance, low wealth students. So this is the traditional model that is based on this deficit thinking. What I'd argue is that we need to refocus the attention and instead figure out ways how to increase our students' achievement, their motivation, their critical awareness, and their sense of belonging in these STEM fields. Because often you guys read about things like the imposter syndrome. You guys read about ways where people of color don't feel like they are part of these communities. By doing so, we believe that this would not only increase representation eventually, but it increase student retention, it'll increase and decrease the students' time to graduation. In order to do this well, in our case, in the case of in my project, we have prepared our faculty, we are trying to prepare our faculty to address these incongruencies through professional development. So this is the hypothesis that we have built based on the needs that we have, myself and my team have perceived among our community. So let me just tell you a little bit about my project, because I can only speak to you about how we built the hypotheses around our project here. As as Delia had mentioned, we built a project built around cultural relevance and community. We feel that this is based on our literature, understanding of the existing literature. We feel that this is a strong foundation on which to build transformative STEM education at our institutions. Ours basically has 3 tenets, and this CESL stands for Community Engagement and Cultural Enhancement, Scholarship, and Learning. So there are 3 main tenets. One is to address academic success of our students by dismantling deficit thinking within our faculty and within students themselves, and then giving students intrinsic motivation to choose academic success. And this is built on work by Valencia, Gloria Ladson-Billings, who also talks about the need of cultural competence, both within our students and within our faculty. Students need a way to maintain cultural integrity and demonstrate pride in self and cultural heritage. You see this often at HBCUs and tribal colleges. They focus on cultural integrity and pride in self, and HSIs in many ways do not. And then finally, to think about how to strengthen critical consciousness in both our students and faculty, and that they become aware of how issues like COVID and how issues like some of the injustices that you see today based on race, how that affects them in their lives and ultimately in their success in our classroom. So we've proposed this kind of 3-pronged approach. We propose faculty development. It starts with actually an intensive faculty development workshop for our faculty. So you can see some of the pictures here. Our faculty go around to communities. They visit community centers, like you see here on the top left of your screen. They visit cities, city facilities. They visit federal facilities, like you see at the very bottom. We took our faculty to the border wall, talked about that in context of students that live on both sides of the wall. We brought them to colonias, which are unincorporated areas. We had them talk with colonia members about access to education, about drainage, about some of the practical realities that our community members and our students go through. We talked to industry, and moreover, we brought the faculty and the community to UTRGV so that there was a mutual understanding of what the realities are, both within an institution and within the community. And this shared learning is known as a community learning exchange. It was modeled by Miguel Guajardo and Francisco Guajardo, who are part of our team in this. And so you can see some very intensive training, right? There are on the inner circle in this picture are our faculty. These are all like science, physics. I see chemists, I see marine biologists, I see physiologists. They're in there. And they are discussing with the outside ring here, the outside circle. Those are community members, those are students, those are parents of students who are talking about some of the different issues that they face, in terms of getting access and equity inside of the sciences, for example. So with this, we actually have a hypothesis in which we're testing. So they are trying to go, we are trying to expose our faculty to this intensive training And the hypothesis we can test here is whether these trainings, these CLEs, community learning exchanges, make any difference in terms of transforming our faculty's teaching philosophies, their approaches, their pedagogies, and their knowledge, skills, and attributes or attitudes regarding the importance of community and culture in terms of STEM education at UTRGV. And we have a lot of data which we've collected. So far, we have an N of 26. 26 faculty have participated in it. We are shooting for 50 over the 5-year project. And here's something I wanted to share. We also have like some data like here, a photo voice exercise. This is submitted anonymously by one of our faculty at the very end of a long retreat we had, where she had entered, oh, I don't know who this is, but they had entered a birding center, which was part of our visit. And she writes, or he writes, while entering the center, the 2 employees to greet me spoke Spanish, and we had to work together to communicate the layout of the center and the check-in process. So given that experience and the values captured in this picture, this image represents to me the competing priorities, voices, and values in the Rio Grande Valley. Much of the ecotourism and development of the valley has been dedicated in a way to white people from outside the area, even though the local community is the steward of the biological heritage. So that's what they wrote as part of it. And so what we're finding is that the evidence says that, in fact, this development workshop is actually making a marked impact in the understanding of our faculty of who they teach, right? And that's a big part. There's actually a very funny, it's a trick question. You know, they ask, thank you. They ask, we ask our, what do you teach? And most of us, of course, would respond, well, I teach chemistry. And the truth is who we teach are students, and in particular, students at a Hispanic serving institution that have specific assets that they bring. And that's something that we want our faculty to recognize. So then these faculty continue to receive development after doing a training over 1 year. They receive development, they receive incentives to transform some of the classes they're teaching. Sometimes it's the entire class, and sometimes it is just one module of their class or one lab in their lab. But what we ask them to do is to use this cultural relevance and community engaged framework to transform the way that they teach their students. And you see in some of these pictures are like students who are taking statistics instead of using a data set. They will go out into the community and collect data from folks who are protesting with the United Farm Workers Union, for example. Or you would have math professors using cultural relevant examples of teaching things like volume, for example, you see in this image here. You see other faculty here who are actually embedding their students in community, and in fact bringing the community as subject matter experts to be able to discuss some of the realities and interweave that cultural context and the relevance into what the students are doing. You see a picture here in the top right, that's myself. I teach a class called Community Forestry. And of course, this semester we had to change that into a online platform, which we're still working on some of that implication. And here in this exercise, we can also test a new hypothesis. We can test another hypothesis that we see that whether there are differences in the students' academic achievement, in their motivation, in their critical awareness, in their sense of belonging, and then ultimately their retention and their time to graduation between the students that are enrolled in these courses and those that are enrolled in other courses, sometimes even in courses that some of the faculty teach, in other courses that they teach, right? So you can see here is that we were able to take this important need and be able to frame a hypothesis around that. We wanted to understand better whether this type of intervention had an impact on students, right? And so this is just an example that I share from our own work. Of course, this is relative to what we do here at UTRGV. I think it's applicable to a lot of the Hispanic serving institutions out there, many of those that you guys are at. And I wanted to share my specific example, but I also wanted to just kind of give you 3 general suggestions, if I may. Is that, if you could take anything away from this presentation, one is that there is a desperate need for boundary spanning. You as a scholar You have an opportunity to find information to help us as STEM educators better understand our students and the communities in which we live, and then use this in kind of our expertise in research to build bridges, but bridges built on foundations of compassion, of relationships, and reciprocity. I also encourage all of you guys to build on an assets-based foundation. So there is a bunch of literature out there that says that we should dispel this deficit-based assumptions. In part is because things like imposter syndrome are linked to depreciation, right? And a lot of us students of color, they experience this, and it's built on some of these systemic issues that that we're acknowledging today, right, in this discussion and in the world. And so these are things like cultural relevant pedagogy, cultural wealth, and this idea of community that have been linked to the birth of many Hispanic and ethnic studies programs across the country. And in particular, it's linked to the birth of the Hispanic serving institutions, you know, as I discussed earlier in the presentation. And then the last thing that I think you should take away is this idea of backward design by McTee and Wiggins. So what are the desired outcomes from your work, right? And what is the acceptable evidence to guide you there? And then use that to drive the hypotheses and the research questions that you are trying to build. And the final thing is once you think about that in that way, then you'll be able to identify who you need on your side to be successful, not just to pull off the research part, but to actually implement the changes that are required in an informed and empirically based way. So with that, I thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. I put all my contact information here. I also am a professor in agriculture and environmental sciences. So a lot of the scholarship that I do is built around that, but the link to our program is here. Everything I talked about today is on the website, including the syllabi of the faculty that have taught courses, the agendas of all the professional development workshops that we've done. It's all online, and you can get it. You can just download it, you know, or you can email me, and I'm happy to dialogue with any of you guys. Thank you. Thank you, Delia.